I woke to find reality was nothing like I believed. The world I'd built with my wife of 5 years, Isa Porter, came crashing down around me that night. My name is Hendrix Porter, and I'm 33 years old. Every morning I wake in the house I fought to keep, drink coffee on the deck I built with my own hands, and remember what it cost me. My wife Isa betrayed me with David Benson, my best friend since 8th grade, the same man who stood beside me at our wedding. When I discovered them together in our bed, I realized their affair wasn't impulsive but calculated. They thought I'd explode, giving them leverage to paint me as unstable. I chose a different path. Justice would come through evidence, patience, and truth, not rage. My military training taught me to outthink opponents, not just outfight them. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. The tires of my Tacoma hummed against the asphalt as I drove home through the quiet suburban streets. It was just past 11 and most houses were already dark. My deployment had ended 48 hours early due to a transport schedule change. A stroke of luck, I thought at the time. 7 months away, and now I was just minutes from surprising Isa. She's going to flip, I whispered to myself, rehearsing the moment in my head. I'd called her earlier that day with the usual "miss you, 2 more days" routine, never letting on that I was already stateside. The flowers, yellow tulips, her favorite, sat on the passenger seat next to a bag of Thai takeout that was still warm. I pictured her face lighting up, imagined her dropping whatever she was doing and running into my arms. The neighborhood was quiet as I pulled into our driveway, cutting the headlights before I turned in. Our house, the one I'd bought before we were married, the one I'd spent my leaves renovating, stood dark except for the bedroom light upstairs. My heart quickened. She was still awake. I grabbed the flowers and food, approaching the front door as quietly as possible. The key slid into the lock, but when I turned it, I realized the door was already unlocked, half-latched, like someone hadn't pulled it fully closed. Not like Isa at all. She was religious about locking up when she was home alone. Stepping inside, I set my duffel bag down by the door and took a moment to soak in the feeling of being home. The familiar smell of our house, but with something else layered on top. Something floral and heavy that we didn't usually have. I moved toward the kitchen, planning to arrange the food and flowers before calling out to her. That's when I saw them. 2 wine glasses in the sink, one with a lipstick smudge on the rim. Isa rarely drank alone. A bottle of red I didn't recognize stood half empty on the counter. "Company?" I murmured, my brow furrowing. I wondered if her sister was visiting. The house felt different. A candle flickered on the coffee table, filling the room with that unfamiliar perfume scent. Not Isa's usual choice. Something expensive. Something new. I headed for the stairs, flowers in hand, takeout forgotten on the counter. Each step creaked slightly under my boots, the same creaks I'd memorized before leaving. Third step from the top was the loudest. I automatically stepped over it. As I reached the hallway, I heard it. Muffled laughter, followed by the sound of movement behind our bedroom door. A man's voice too low to make out the words, and then Isa's laugh. That intimate laugh I thought was just for me. My hand hovered at the doorknob. 7 months of missing her, of falling asleep to her photo, of counting days. And now this frozen moment where I already knew but couldn't yet admit what waited on the other side. I opened the door. Time slowed. Details burned into my memory with painful clarity. Sheets tangled around their bodies, Isa's dark hair splayed across the pillow, David's arm around her waist. My wife, my best friend, in our bed. They didn't notice me at first. Then Isa's eyes flicked toward the door, widened in horror. She gasped, yanking the sheet up to her chin. "Hendrix!" My name came out strangled. David jerked upright, his expression shifting from shock to something like resignation. No real surprise there, just the look of someone finally caught. I didn't shout, didn't throw things. I just stood there, memorizing every detail of their betrayal. His smirk fading to unease, her face draining of color, the wedding photo of us still sitting on the nightstand. With mechanical precision, I walked to the dresser and set down the tulips like I was placing evidence at a crime scene. "How long?" My voice came out steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. Hendricks, you weren't supposed to be back yet. Isa's voice quavered, like that explained everything. David was already reaching for his jeans. Man, listen, this just happened. It's not what you think. A one-night mistake doesn't leave 2 wine glasses in the sink. I cut him off, my tone flat. How long? Isa started to cry, those tears I'd seen so many times before when we argued. This time, they looked rehearsed. We didn't mean for it to happen, she stammered. 3 months, David said, pulling his shirt on. But it's complicated. You've been gone? Get out. I stepped aside from the doorway, my eyes never leaving his. Now. He tried to hold my gaze but couldn't. Hendricks, we should talk about this like what? Friends? The word tasted like poison. Get out of my house before I throw you out. David grabbed his shoes, glancing at Isa once more before brushing past me. I heard his footsteps down the stairs, then the front door closing. I turned back to Isa, who was clutching the sheet like a shield. Get dressed, kitchen table. 5 minutes. My voice didn't rise above a whisper. Downstairs, I sat at our kitchen table, hands flat against the wood to stop them from shaking. The flowers I'd brought lay forgotten upstairs, the takeout growing cold on the counter. 7 months of longing ended in 7 minutes of betrayal. I waited, my mind already calculating what would come next. I heard Isa's footsteps on the stairs before I saw her. She'd taken longer than 5 minutes, probably trying to compose herself or maybe texting David. Either way, I wasn't in a rush. The night was already shot to hell. She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her silk robe, the one I'd bought her last Christmas. Her eyes were red and puffy, mascara smudged beneath them. The sight would have broken my heart a day ago. Sit down, I said, pushing a glass of water across the table. She slid into the chair across from me, her hands trembling as she reached for the water. I deliberately pushed the 2 empty wine glasses to the edge of the table, a silent reminder of what I'd found. How long has this really been going on? I asked again. And don't lie to me. Not anymore. Isa stared at the water, turning the glass in small circles. It started about 4 months ago. 4 months. The words felt like stones in my mouth. So almost as soon as I deployed. I was lonely, Hendricks. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You were gone and Lonely? I cut her off. Lonely people call. Lonely people write letters. Lonely people don't climb into bed with their husband's best friend. She flinched. It wasn't like that. It just happened. Nothing just happens, Isa. You made choices. Both of you. I leaned forward. Did you sleep with him in our bed every time? Or was tonight special? Don't do this, she pleaded. Answer the question. Not every time. Her admission hung in the air between us. I remembered the weekends I'd called, and she hadn't answered. The video chats she'd cut short. The deployment care packages that had stopped coming after the 2nd month. All those moments reframed now, tainted by this new knowledge. So, while I was living in a metal container in the desert, missing you every day, you were... A sound at the back door interrupted me. David stood in the doorway, his face a mask of false concern. I hadn't even heard him come back in. What are you doing here? I demanded, standing up. I'm not leaving her alone with you when you're like this. He stepped into the kitchen like he had every right to be there. Like what? Betrayed? Angry? What exactly did you expect? My voice remained controlled, but only just. David ran a hand through his hair, that same gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when we were kids getting into trouble. Look, man, I get you're upset, but this wasn't just about... you chose the Air Force over her. You're gone more than you're here. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. I chose to serve my country. That's not abandonment, that's duty. What you chose was betrayal. Hendricks, Isa started. No. I cut her off. Don't defend him, not now. David moved closer to Isa, placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't agree to anything he says tonight, he's trying to intimidate you. I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. Intimidate her? I just want the truth for once. We'll handle this properly, David told her, not me. Through attorneys. He can't just dictate terms to you. I stared at them both, the reality of the situation crystallizing. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. They were already united against me. Isa, I said, my voice deadly calm. You have two options here. We can separate cleanly, fair split, no games, or we can go to war. And trust me, if it's war, I'll bring every piece of evidence to the table. Every text, every credit card statement, every lie you've told me for the past 4 months. David squeezed her shoulder. He's bluffing. Don't let him push you around. Isa looked between us, her face pale. Then something hardened in her expression. I'm filing for divorce in the morning, she said. And I want half of everything, including the house. The house I bought before we were married, I reminded her. The one protected by our prenup? Prenups can be challenged, David interjected with a smirk. Especially when there's evidence of threatening behavior. I'll testify to your temper if I need to. I stared at them both, a cold realization settling into my bones. This wasn't a broken marriage anymore. This wasn't even just a betrayal. This was war, and they'd already chosen their weapons. Then I guess we're done talking for tonight, I said quietly. But remember, you started this, not me. I barely slept that night. By dawn, I was showered, dressed, and behind the wheel with a folder full of evidence on the passenger seat. The military teaches you to respond to chaos with procedure. When everything falls apart, you follow protocol. My protocol today: Attorney Ava Hart, recommended by 3 guys in my unit who'd been through similar nightmares. Her office was downtown, an understated suite with diplomas on the wall and family law books stacked neatly on shelves. She greeted me with a firm handshake and sympathetic eyes that didn't cross into pity. Sergeant Porter. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Let's get straight to it. I sat down and placed my folder on her desk. Everything I have is in here. Ava opened it methodically. First came the screenshots of text messages I'd found on our shared tablet. Messages Isa had forgotten to delete. Then bank statements showing withdrawals and hotel charges from weekends when I was deployed. Finally, footage from our doorbell camera showing David entering our house late at night on multiple occasions. You've been thorough, she said, nodding with approval. Military training, I replied. Document everything. She pulled out a document from the bottom of my stack. And this is your prenuptial agreement? I'd almost forgotten about it. Isa had called it unromantic when I'd insisted on it 3 years ago. But I'd bought the house before we married, using my savings and a VA loan. I wasn't risking it then, and thank God I hadn't. Yes, I confirmed. We both signed it before the wedding. Her signature is on the last page. Ava skimmed through it, her expression brightening. This is excellent news, Sergeant. This prenup is solid. It clearly designates the house as your separate property. That's one battle we won't have to fight. For the first time since opening that bedroom door, I felt something like relief. What's our next move? We file first, she said decisively. We protect your assets immediately. Then we prepare for temporary orders. That's where they'll try to establish a status quo that favors her. She laid out a timeline, explained costs, and walked me through worst-case scenarios. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. And a plan meant focus. That evening, I sent a text to Janet, Isa's mother. Janet, I'd like to meet tomorrow to discuss what's happened. I think having you present might help keep things civil. Your kitchen, maybe? Just let me know what time works. Janet had always liked me. She was practical, no nonsense, and valued stability. Everything her daughter seemed to have forgotten. Her reply came within minutes, 3 p.m. I'll make sure she's here. This needs to be addressed like adults. The next day, I arrived at Janet's modest ranch-style home at exactly 3 p.m. I'd always appreciated its worn comfort, so different from Isa's constant desire to upgrade our house with trendy decor. Janet opened the door with a tight smile. They're in the kitchen, she said, her voice low. David came with her. I couldn't stop her from bringing him. I nodded, unsurprised. Thank you for doing this. We walked into the kitchen where Isa and David sat side by side at the round oak table. His presence was a clear message. They were a united front now. Hendricks, Isa acknowledged coldly. Janet took a seat between us. Like a referee at a match everyone knew would turn ugly. I placed my hands flat on the table. I think we can resolve this without dragging it through court. That's why I wanted to meet. Go ahead, Janet encouraged. Here's what I propose, I said, looking directly at Isa. You move into an apartment. I keep the house. We split the accounts evenly. You keep your car. I don't want a dime from you, but you're not taking me for one either. David snorted. That's your idea of fair? The house is worth more than everything else combined. The house I bought before we were married, I reminded him. The house protected by our prenup. Prenups can be challenged, he said, leaning forward, especially when there's financial disparity. I turned to Isa. Is that your position too? She lifted her chin. I helped make that house a home. I deserve half. David placed his hand over hers. She deserves more than half considering what you put her through with your deployments. I felt a flash of anger but kept my voice steady. My deployments were my job, my service. They weren't a betrayal, unlike what you two did. You don't dictate terms, Isa snapped, her voice rising. That's not how this works. David leaned in. She can push for more, and she should. You know that. I closed my eyes for a second, centering myself. When I opened them, I looked between the three faces watching me. Janet's concern, Isa's defiance, David's smugness. I came here hoping to be reasonable, I said. But I want to be clear about something. Everything, and I mean everything, I have is documented. Every late-night visit. I looked at David. Every charge to my accounts while I was deployed. I turned to Isa. Every text message you thought you deleted. Janet's expression shifted. She hadn't known the details. If you want war instead of peace, I continued, then understand what you're walking into. The evidence goes to court. All of it. David's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. You're bluffing. I stood up slowly. Try me. Janet's eyes moved between us, clearly uneasy about what she was witnessing. And in that moment, I realized David's influence was pushing this toward full conflict. He wasn't just the man who'd slept with my wife. He was the voice in her ear, convincing her to fight for what was never hers to begin with. I was outside the courthouse by 7:30 the next morning. Ava Hart was already waiting at the entrance, her leather portfolio tucked under her arm, wearing a gray suit that screamed business. No small talk, no time wasted. Ready? She asked as I approached. As I'll ever be. We walked up the stone steps together, our footsteps echoing in the morning quiet. The courthouse was just waking up. Clerks shuffling papers, security guards yawning, attorneys in various states of caffeine consumption. Filing first matters, Ava explained as we made our way to the clerk's office. It sets the tone. It shows you're not a victim, but someone taking action. I liked that. Taking action had been my mantra since the military. Don't wait for orders when you know what needs doing. The clerk stamped our divorce petition, handed Ava a case number, and just like that, my marriage was officially dying on paper. I should have felt something. Grief, maybe. But all I felt was a steely determination. We've requested a preliminary hearing for temporary orders, Ava said as we walked out. Expect it within the week. In the meantime, document everything. Everything's already documented, I told her, thinking about the folder growing thicker by the day. Good, she nodded. Because they're going to lie. Count on it. I couldn't have known how right she would be. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. 3 days of waiting, checking accounts, adding to my evidence folder, and trying not to imagine Isa and David celebrating what they thought was their inevitable victory. Remember how your dad used to take you fishing up at Lake Marshall? The way he'd tell you to be patient, that the big ones take time? I found myself thinking about that a lot during those 3 days. The stillness of waiting for something to bite. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood-paneled walls and uncomfortable benches. Ava sat beside me at one table, while Isa and her attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat at the other. David wasn't there. Not yet. When the judge entered, a balding man with tired eyes, everyone stood. Temporary orders hearing for Porter versus Porter, the clerk announced. I'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than I felt when Isa's attorney stood up to speak first. Your Honor, my client is seeking standard temporary orders, including use of the marital home during proceedings. Mrs. Porter has been effectively locked out of her residence due to Mr. Porter's volatile behavior upon discovering her indiscretion. My jaw clenched. Volatile behavior? I'd been calmer than anyone had a right to expect. Mr. Porter exhibited rage and threatening posture when he discovered Mrs. Porter with a friend, he continued. She fears returning to the home without court protection. I leaned toward Ava. That's a lie. She nodded slightly, making notes. When it was her turn, Ava stood with confidence. Your Honor, the residence in question is Mr. Porter's separate property, purchased before marriage and protected by a valid prenuptial agreement. As for allegations of threatening behavior, we categorically deny them. The judge looked bored. Any witnesses to this alleged behavior? That's when the courtroom door opened and David walked in. Ever had that moment when everything inside you goes absolutely silent, like someone hit mute on your thoughts? That's what happened when David took the stand, raised his hand, and swore to tell the truth. Mr. Benson, Isa's attorney began, please describe Mr. Porter's behavior when he discovered you and Mrs. Porter. David cleared his throat. He was enraged, red-faced. When I tried to explain, he shoved me back against the wall and told me he'd make me pay. I felt the blood drain from my face. None of that had happened. Not a word of it. Objection, Ava called out. We have doorbell camera footage from that night, which doesn't show the interior of the home, Isa's attorney countered. Only comings and goings. The judge sighed. Do you have audio that contradicts this testimony? Partial, Ava admitted, but without context. Then I'll hear it at the full hearing. The judge cut her off. For now, I'm issuing standard temporary orders. Joint accounts are frozen pending final division. Mrs. Porter will retain access to her vehicle. Mr. Porter may remain in the residence as his separate property claim will be addressed at final hearing. It was a small victory mixed with a bitter defeat. I'd keep the house for now, but our finances were locked down, and the judge clearly believed I was some kind of hothead. David caught my eye as he left the witness stand. He didn't smirk. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he gave a small, sad shake of his head, like he pitied me. It was worse than any grin could have been. I walked back into my house that evening feeling sick. The silence that had once felt like peace now felt like exile. This was my home, but suddenly I was the one defending my right to be here. I paced from room to room until 2 a.m., replaying their lies in my head. The shove that never happened. The rage I never expressed. The wall that was never touched. How do you fight lies when they're told convincingly enough? When morning came, I called Ava. They're going to keep lying, I said when she answered, and the judge is going to keep believing them unless we do something. We need more, she agreed, specifically evidence of financial misconduct. If they've been carrying on this affair, there are almost certainly money trails. I hung up and pulled out every bank statement, credit card bill, and account summary from the past year. With a yellow highlighter, I started marking patterns. Hotel charges on nights I was deployed. Restaurant bills for two at places I'd never been. A necklace purchased on my credit card that I'd never seen Isa wear. As the highlighted sections grew, so did my resolve. I printed everything, organized it chronologically, and added it to my evidence folder. This wasn't about words anymore. This was about numbers. And numbers don't lie. Janet's kitchen always smelled like cinnamon and coffee. It was the place where Isa and I had announced our engagement, where we'd celebrated promotions and birthdays. Now I was spreading bank statements across the maple table like crime scene photos. I brought these so you can see the whole picture, I said, laying out the evidence one page at a time. Janet peered through her reading glasses, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Isa sat rigid in her chair while David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The morning light through the kitchen window cast everything in harsh clarity. This is the joint account I maintained for household expenses, I explained, pointing to the statement summaries. Every month during deployment, my direct deposit went in like clockwork. Janet's finger traced the consistent deposits, $2,800 on the first of every month. Her eyes widened as she saw the pattern. For years, she'd heard Isa's complaints about me not providing enough. And these, I continued, laying down highlighted credit card statements, are charges at the Lakeside Hotel on 6 different occasions during my last deployment. I placed hotel receipts beside them. Room service for 2, movies, champagne. You're cherry-picking transactions. Isa snapped, her voice brittle. This doesn't show anything, doesn't it? I slid another paper forward. A receipt for a $780 necklace purchased on my credit card 3 months ago. I never saw this. Did you, Janet? Janet shook her head slowly, the betrayal registering in her eyes. This is manipulation, Isa insisted, her knuckles white around her coffee mug. He's twisting everything. David pushed off from the counter. None of this proves anything, man. You're just trying to make Isa look bad because you can't handle that she moved on. I turned to him, keeping my voice level. Actually, I have one more thing that might interest everyone. I placed David's credit report on the table, legally obtained through our attorney as part of the discovery process. No income for 8 months, no apartment lease. Just mounting debt and cash withdrawals that coincide with deposits to his account from our joint funds. Janet's mouth fell open. Isa, you've been supporting him? With Hendrix's money? It wasn't like that, Isa protested, but her voice had lost its edge. Then what was it like? Janet demanded, fully awake now. You told me Hendrix abandoned you financially. You said you were struggling to make ends meet while he was gone. Mom. Don't mom me, Janet cut her off. I gave you grocery money. I paid your car insurance because you said Hendrix wasn't sending enough home. The room went silent except for the old kitchen clock ticking on the wall. I remember when Janet gave it to us as a housewarming gift. Said every home needed something that reminded you time was passing. He's twisting everything, Isa repeated. But even she didn't seem convinced anymore. David stepped forward. This is all circumstantial. You can't prove. I don't have to prove anything to you, I interrupted. The judge will see these records. The court will order a complete financial review. Everyone will know exactly what happened to our money while I was deployed. Janet set her coffee down with a sharp crack against the table. I want to know right now, Isa. Did you lie to me about Hendrix not supporting you? Isa's face flushed red. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the linoleum. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and be attacked. She stormed out, the screen door slamming behind her. David hesitated, glancing between me and Janet before following, but not before shooting me a glare that could have melted steel. Janet and I sat in silence for a long moment. I'm sorry, I finally said. I know this is hard for you too. She removed her glasses, suddenly looking older. No, Hendrix. I'm the one who should apologize. I believed her. That evening, I met Ava at her office. The sunset painted her windows orange as she reviewed the additional evidence I'd gathered. The judge will definitely want to see this, she said, tapping the folder. But we should go further. I want to request a forensic financial review of the entire marriage. What would that involve? A court-appointed accountant examines every transaction, every account. It's typically used in high-asset divorces, but in your case it would demonstrate transparency and credibility. She leaned forward. More importantly, it would expose their pattern of deception, not just to me or to Janet, but to the court. I thought about the look on Janet's face when she realized Isa had been lying all along. How that same realization would hit the judge, backed by professional analysis rather than my highlighted statements. Let's do it, I nodded. Let's pull back the curtain all the way. The morning of the full hearing, I sat in Ava's office, my uniform pressed and my notes organized in front of me. We'd been at it for nearly 2 hours, with Ava firing questions at me like we were back in basic training. Remember, she said, leaning forward across her desk, when opposing counsel tries to push your buttons about your deployments, don't defend your service. Just state the facts, dates, communication methods, financial transfers, let the record speak for itself. I nodded, running my thumb over the edge of the folder. What about when David testifies? Don't react, she emphasized. No head shaking, no eye rolling, nothing that could make you look aggressive. The judge will be watching you as much as the witnesses. We'd practiced enough that I could almost recite her advice in my sleep. Still, knowing what to do and actually doing it when faced with the 2 people who'd torn apart my life, that was the real test. You're ready, she assured me, gathering her papers. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we finish this. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind kept cycling through scenarios. Would Isa break down in tears? Would David try another angle to make me look unstable? I stared at the ceiling, remembering the nights I'd spent in barracks overseas, homesick for a life that no longer existed. The courthouse steps gleamed in the morning sun as I climbed them, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside the lobby, I spotted them immediately. Isa with her mother, her face carefully composed, and David lounging against a pillar nearby, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I passed, a smirk touching his lips before he glanced away. Isa didn't meet my eyes at all. Ava met me by the courtroom doors, her briefcase bulging with evidence. Ready? As I'll ever be. The courtroom had that same sterile, tense feeling as our preliminary hearing, but this time I was prepared. I took my seat beside Ava, focusing on my breathing as the judge entered and proceedings began. Isa testified first, repeating her story about feeling abandoned, about struggling financially. She carefully avoided mentioning David until Ava stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Porter, Ava began, her voice clear and controlled. You stated that Sergeant Porter failed to provide adequate financial support during his deployment. Is that correct? Yes, Isa said, her chin lifting slightly. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit C, Ava said, handing documents to the clerk. These are bank records showing monthly transfers of $2,800 from Sergeant Porter's account to your joint household account during his entire deployment. Do you recognize these transactions? Isa hesitated, her eyes flicking toward her attorney. Those, yes, but that doesn't cover everything. Everything like the 4 separate hotels stays charged to your joint credit card? Ava asked, placing another document before her. The Grand Palace Hotel, Room 412, February 18th. The Harborview Inn, March 3rd. Shall I continue? The color drained from Isa's face. Those were personal expenses, Ava finished for her. And this necklace purchased from Tiffany's for $780. Also a necessary household expense? Objection. Isa's lawyer interrupted. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm establishing a pattern of financial misconduct, Ava replied smoothly. Mrs. Porter claimed financial hardship while making luxury purchases. The judge nodded. Overruled. The witness will answer. Isa's voice shrank. I bought the necklace, yes. One final question, Mrs. Porter. Earlier, you testified that you were struggling to make ends meet. With $2,800 deposited monthly plus your own income, what exactly was causing this struggle? The silence stretched. I watched Isa's fingers twist together, her wedding ring still on her left hand, the one thing she hadn't pawned or spent. I had other expenses, she finally murmured. Ava nodded. No further questions for this witness. When David took the stand, his earlier confidence had dimmed. He kept adjusting his tie, shooting glances toward Isa. Ava approached him with the same measured calm. Mr. Benson, what is your current employment status? David shifted in his seat. I do contracting work. For which company? Independent. Freelance stuff. Ava nodded. And when was your last paid contract? David's jaw tightened. I'd have to check my records. Would your answer change if I told you we've subpoenaed your banking records? Ava asked, placing his credit report on the stand. According to this, you haven't had a significant deposit from any employer in over 8 months. Your credit cards show increasing debt, and your only cash deposits align perfectly with withdrawals from the Porter's joint account. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter paused. Mr. Benson, Ava continued, have you been financially dependent on Mrs. Porter during her husband's deployment? David looked like he might be sick. We helped each other out. With Sergeant Porter's money, Ava clarified. Yes or no? He swallowed hard. Yes, sometimes. The judge's pen scratched across his notepad. His expression gave nothing away, but the silence felt weighted. After David's testimony crumbled further under questioning, the judge called a recess, scheduling the continuation for tomorrow afternoon. I'll hear closing arguments then, he said, and will be prepared to rule on all matters. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps watching people come and go. The sun had shifted, shadows stretching across the concrete. Tomorrow would determine everything, whether my home remained mine, whether the stability I'd built would stand or fall. I stared at the heavy courthouse doors, my resolve hardening like concrete. I wouldn't falter now, not when the truth was finally coming to light. The afternoon sun slanted through the high courthouse windows as we filed back into the courtroom. My palms were damp, but my mind was clear. I'd been in high-pressure situations before. This was just another mission with different stakes. Ava had saved our strongest evidence for last. As the judge settled into his chair, she approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to present Exhibit G, video footage from Sergeant Porter's home security system." The bailiff dimmed the light slightly as the screen flickered to life. The timestamp read 11:38 p.m., 3 weeks before I returned home. There was David walking up to my front door, a bottle of wine in hand. He paused, looked directly at the doorbell camera, and smirked before pressing the bell. My stomach knotted watching him stand there. So comfortable, so entitled. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Play that again," he ordered. The second viewing felt worse. That smirk said everything. This wasn't some mistake or moment of weakness. This was calculated. "Sergeant Porter," Ava said, calling me to the stand. "Please describe your routine during deployment to maintain your household and marriage." I sat straight, hands folded in my lap. I scheduled video calls twice weekly at times that accommodated the time difference. I transferred $2,800 on the first of every month to our joint account, which covered our mortgage and all normal household expenses. I sent birthday gifts, anniversary presents, and holiday packages in advance. And how did you prepare for your return? I notified my wife 3 weeks prior to my expected arrival date. I arranged for flowers to be delivered the day I was originally scheduled to return. I glanced toward Isa. Her eyes were fixed on her hands, shoulders hunched forward. She'd stopped crying, maybe finally realizing tears wouldn't work anymore. Isa's attorney tried to paint me as rigid, suggesting my military service made me controlling and emotionally unavailable. I waited for him to finish before responding. "Sir, discipline isn't the same as control. I've learned in the Air Force that consistency keeps people safe. I applied that same principle to my marriage. Every month, same amount, same day. Every week, same calls, rain or shine. That's not control. That's commitment." When he pressed about my reaction finding them together, I stayed measured. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch either of them. I asked them to explain, and then I asked Mr. Benson to leave. "But weren't you angry?" He pushed. I met his eyes directly. Of course I was angry, but I've been trained to handle situations under extreme stress. Finding my wife with another man qualifies as stressful, but it doesn't excuse losing control. After closing arguments, the judge removed his glasses, polishing them slowly. The courtroom fell silent. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable." He looked directly at me. "The residence at 1422 Oakwood Drive remains the sole property of Sergeant Porter, purchased prior to the marriage with no significant community property contribution." Relief washed through me, but I kept my face neutral. "Joint accounts are hereby frozen pending final dissolution. Mrs. Porter shall repay 50% of funds misappropriated for non-household expenses, totaling $6,143. He shuffled papers. "As for the testimony of Mr. Benson, I find it substantially compromised by his personal involvement with the respondent and financial dependence on the marital assets." The gavel came down with finality. "We're adjourned." I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. From the back of the courtroom, I caught Janet's eye. Her expression was devastated, embarrassed. She stood and left, without looking at Isa. In the hallway, Ava squeezed my arm. "You did well in there. I'll start the paperwork for the final decree." As she walked away, Isa approached, her makeup perfectly fixed, despite everything. "Hendricks," she said softly, "can we talk? Maybe start over somehow?" Before I could answer, David appeared behind her. His confidence had cracked, but he still managed that smirk I'd seen on the camera. "Guess you won this one, man," he said, trying to sound casual. The hallway went quiet. Court staff paused. Other attorneys slowed their pace. Everyone waiting to see what I would say to the wife and best friend who had betrayed me, now that I'd won. I stared at Isa standing there in the courthouse hallway, her eyes wide with desperate hope. She looked smaller somehow, her designer outfit hanging on her frame as if she'd lost weight since I caught them together. For a fleeting second, I remembered how she used to greet me at the door when I came home from base, before deployments became routine, before David became her go-to. "Hendrix, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can talk this through. We can rebuild something. For stability, you know. For our future." The word "our" felt like sandpaper against my ears. 3 weeks ago, I might have wavered. 3 weeks ago, I hadn't seen her testimony, hadn't watched her try to take my house, hadn't realized how deeply the betrayal ran. "We did start over, Isa," I said, my voice level, but cold. "You're starting over without me." She flinched like I'd raised my hand to her. The color drained from her face, and for once there were no tears. Just the stark reality that this was truly, finally over. David stood slightly behind her, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. That familiar smirk appeared on his face, the same one I'd seen in the doorbell footage, the same one he'd worn in court when he thought the judge would believe him. "Guess you won this one, man," he said with a forced chuckle, like we were just finishing a game of basketball in my driveway like we used to. Like betrayal was just a competition, and I'd pulled ahead in the last quarter. I stepped closer to him, close enough that Isa couldn't hear when I lowered my voice. "No, David. You lost." I held his gaze. "And you'll keep losing, because that's who you are." The smirk collapsed, replaced by something raw and angry. For a moment, I thought he might throw a punch, might give me one last chance to watch him fail publicly. Instead, he took a step back, eyes darting around as if searching for support that wasn't there. "Let's go," he muttered to Isa, putting his hand on her lower back. The same proprietary gesture I'd seen him use at cookouts with other people's girlfriends over the years. I watched them walk away, Isa's shoulders hunched, David's posture stiff. They didn't look like victors. They looked broken, caught, exposed. I realized I didn't need to destroy them. They'd done that themselves. That evening, I unlocked the door to my house. My house. The silence that greeted me felt different than it had that morning. It wasn't the hollow echo of abandonment anymore. It was simply peace. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and wandered through the rooms. The kitchen where I'd confronted Isa. The living room where we'd once watched movies. The hallway leading to the bedroom where everything had fallen apart. But with each step, the space felt more mine again. Not ours. Mine. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the texture of the paint. Isa had chosen the colors, soft grays and blues that she said were calming. Tomorrow, I decided I'd buy new paint, maybe something warmer. I raised my glass in a silent toast to myself, to the house that remained mine, to the life I'd fought to keep. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and filled my cart with painting supplies. The clerk asked if I was doing a big renovation, and I just nodded. Renovation, restoration, reclamation. All of those words fit. I started with the bedroom. Stripped the sheets and blankets first, stuffing them into garbage bags. Then I taped the edges of the walls, spread drop cloths over the floor, and opened the windows wide. The first stroke of the roller felt cathartic, covering the pale blue with a rich, earthy brown. With each pass, I erased a memory, painted over a betrayal. By evening, the bedroom walls were transformed. I'd need another coat tomorrow, but already the room looked different. It looked like mine. I showered, washing away paint speckles and sweat, then dressed in clean clothes. On impulse, I drove to the florist and bought fresh flowers. Not roses like I'd brought that night, but sunflowers, bright and unapologetic. Back home, I arranged them in a vase and set it on the dining room table. Not the dresser where I'd laid those other flowers like evidence. Not anywhere associated with what I'd lost. These flowers weren't for mourning. They were for new beginnings. 6 weeks after the court ruling, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The quiet felt right. The house had transformed in small but significant ways. New paint in every room, different furniture arrangement, a workshop set up in the spare bedroom where I'd started building a bookshelf, something I'd always wanted to try. The physical changes reflected something deeper. This space was mine again, unmarked by betrayal. Every morning I woke up without that sick feeling in my stomach. Every night, I slept without replaying courtroom scenes in my head. The rage that had fueled me through those weeks had burned itself out, leaving behind something calmer but no less resolute. You might wonder what happened to Isa. I heard through mutual friends that she was renting a cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, the kind of place with thin walls and water pressure that barely qualifies as a shower. She'd picked up extra shifts at work just to cover rent and her car payment. The lifestyle adjustment had been severe, from our spacious house with the deck where I now sat, to a place where she couldn't even host dinner for friends. Speaking of friends, most of hers had drifted away. Not in dramatic confrontations, but in the slow fade that happens when people learn ugly truths. The invitations stopped. The supportive messages thinned out. Nobody wants to rally around someone whose betrayal is documented in hotel receipts and doorbell footage. Janet told me Isa had shown up at her house crying about how unfair everything was, how she'd lost everything while I kept the house. Janet, God bless that woman, had simply asked, "And whose fault is that?" Some wounds don't heal, not even between mother and daughter. As for David, his consequence came harder and faster than I expected. Word travels in a small community, especially when it involves someone who spent years building a reputation as everyone's buddy. The contracting company he'd been working for cut ties with him after the owner heard about the affair. Apparently, men who sleep with their best friend's wife aren't considered trustworthy business partners. Who would have thought? With no income and his reputation shredded, David ended up moving into his brother's basement. The same brother who'd looked up to him for years now had to listen to David stumble in at midnight after striking out at the local dive bars. I ran into his brother at the hardware store last week. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just mumbled something about being sorry and hurried away. Not his fault, but shame spreads like that. Janet told me David had shown up at her door once trying to smooth things over. She'd closed the door in his face. "I raised my daughter better than to be with a man like that," she told me over coffee. "And I failed her somewhere, but I'm not failing myself by letting him charm his way back in. The strange thing is I don't hate them anymore. I don't need to. Their lives have become their punishment. Isa struggling financially, isolated from friends. David living as a basement-dwelling mooch, his charm worn thin, telling exaggerated stories to uninterested strangers at bars that won't extend his tab. I could have spent years bitter, plotting revenge, letting anger eat away at me. Instead, I fought for what was mine, presented the truth, and let their own actions condemn them. The consequences they face aren't my doing. They built their own cages with lies and betrayal. So if you've ever been where I was, standing in a doorway, staring at the wreckage of trust, remember this. You don't win by screaming louder than the lies. You win by standing your ground and letting liars choke on their own deceptions. You win by rebuilding what's yours and walking away from what isn't." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and purples. I picked up my cold coffee and went inside. Tomorrow would be another good day. Mine, and mine alone. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.